Under the blazing Alberta sun, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut hay and sizzling burgers, my father stood up at our family's Canada Day bash. The crowd, hundreds of neighbors, friends, and relatives, clinked their Molson bottles, grinning as he raised his glass to my brother, the golden child, for bringing honor to our name. Then his eyes, cold as a prairie winter, locked onto me. "My daughter," he said, his voice slicing through the cheers, "is a disgrace to this family. Her choices shame us all." Laughter erupted, sharp as broken glass. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, rage and humiliation burning my throat. Every eye was on me, judging, mocking. Then, the outdoor TV flickered. A CBC News anchor's voice boomed, "Breaking, the youngest U.S. general leads a global AI mission." My face flashed on the screen. The crowd went silent. "I'm Evelyn Bouchard. I'm 33 years old." And that moment was just the beginning. The Canada Day crowd buzzed under the Lethbridge twilight, their laughter mingling with the crackle of fireworks bursting over the endless wheat fields. The air was heavy, 25 degrees Celsius, thick with the scent of grilled sausages and spilled Molson. Picnic tables draped in red and white checkered cloths groaned under plates of poutine and maple-glazed ribs. I stood on the edge of the gathering, my cotton shirt clinging to my skin, boots still caked with dust from my last deployment. At 33, I'd led missions across continents, saved thousands, yet here, on my family's sprawling 100-hectare farm, I was invisible. My brother Etienne, resplendent in his navy blue Canadian Forces uniform, held court near the bonfire, spinning tales of Halifax naval drills to a crowd hanging on his every word. "That's our boy," a neighbor clapped his shoulder, grinning. I caught my mother's eye, Marie, fussing over a tray of Nanaimo bars. "Hey, Mom," I called, voice soft, hopeful. She glanced up, her smile thin as ice on the Oldman River. "Grab some poutine, dear," she said, already turning back to Etienne, piling his plate high with food. I swallowed the sting, my chest tightening. My father, Raymond, a retired Canadian Army major, stood nearby, his weathered face glowing with pride for Etienne. He hadn't spoken to me since I chose the U.S. Army over Canada's, a betrayal in his eyes. To him, my stars and bars meant nothing, worse, they were a slap to the Leclerc name. I'd sent money home from my first paycheck at Fort Bragg, scraping by on $2 instant noodles to help fix the farm's leaky barn roof. But Raymond never mentioned it. Neither did Marie. They poured my sacrifices into Etienne's polished career, his tailored uniforms, his Ottawa connections. I was their daughter, but I was also their shame, a woman who dared to outshine their chosen son. Every ignored call, every unopened letter I'd sent from overseas, carved a deeper wound. As the fireworks faded, I stood alone, the weight of their rejection heavier than any rucksack I'd ever carried. The fireworks had fizzled out, leaving only the hum of crickets and the distant clink of Molson bottles under the Lethbridge stars. The Canada Day crowd lingered, their voices a dull roar as they swapped stories around the bonfire's dying embers. I slipped away from the picnic tables, my boots heavy on the gravel path, each step echoing the sting of my father's words, a disgrace, a stain. The TV's revelation, my face, my name, my rank as the youngest U.S. general, had silenced the crowd, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest. I was still invisible to them, a ghost in my own home. The 100-hectare farm stretched endlessly around me, its wheat fields swaying in the cool 15 degrees Celsius night air, but it felt like a cage. I needed answers, something to anchor the rage and hurt clawing inside me. The old storage shed behind the barn called, its rusted door creaking like a warning as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the musty smell of mildew and forgotten things. My flashlight cut through the dark, revealing stacks of cardboard boxes, some labeled for Christmas decorations, others for Etienne's hockey trophies. My brother's life was preserved like a museum exhibit, every medal polished, every memory revered. I scanned the shelves, my heart pounding, searching for a piece of myself in this family story. In the far corner, half buried under a tarp, I found it, a soggy cardboard box, barely holding together, with Evelyn stuff scrawled in my father's jagged handwriting. It wasn't a keepsake label, it was a dismissal, like tagging junk for the curb. I knelt in the dust, my fingers trembling as I peeled back the brittle flaps. The contents hit me like a punch to the sternum. My Calgary Marathon medal, its red and white ribbon faded from the 2010 race, lay crumpled next to a crumpled letter of commendation from my first deployment in Kandahar. A tattered Canadian flag pin, given to me by my grandfather before he passed, was tossed in carelessly, its clasp bent. He'd been a Korean War vet, the only one who ever saw me. "You'll outshine them all, Evelyn," he'd said, his voice rough with pride. Now his gift was discarded, drowned in neglect. I clutched the pin, its edges sharp against my palm, and my breath caught. This wasn't just a box, it was a grave for my existence. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night in the desert, every life I'd saved, reduced to mildew and indifference. My father, Raymond, hadn't just called me a disgrace, he'd erased me. My mother, Marie, who'd brushed me off for Etienne's plate of poutine, hadn't even bothered to keep my marathon medal safe. And Etienne? He'd basked in their adoration while my victories rotted in this shed, 10 meters from the house where I grew up. I wanted to scream, to tear the box apart, but my voice stayed trapped, a knot of rage and grief choking me. Why? I whispered to the dark, my words swallowed by the creak of the shed. No one answered. No one ever did. I sank to my knees, the cold dirt biting through my jeans. Memories flooded in, writing home from Fort Bragg, my letters unanswered, sending half my paycheck to fix the farm's irrigation system, only to hear Marie gush about Etienne's new dress uniform. "It's perfect for Ottawa," she'd said, oblivious to the ramen packets I lived on. I'd carried their weight, their expectations, their legacy, but to them, I was nothing, a woman who dared to choose her own path, who crossed the border to serve in a uniform they despised. The pain wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. My family hadn't just ignored me, they'd buried me alive. I gripped the flag pin tighter, its point drawing a thin line of blood. "You were wrong, Grandpa," I murmured, my voice breaking. "They didn't just forget me. They wanted me gone." But as the shed's silence pressed in, something shifted. The pain burned, but it also forged. I wasn't done. Not yet. The shed's damp air clung to my skin like a shroud, the weight of that soggy cardboard box, Evelyn's stuff, still crushing my chest. My grandfather's Canadian flag pin, its edges sharp with betrayal, bit into my palm as I stumbled back toward the Canada Day gathering. The Lethbridge night had cooled to 12 degrees Celsius, but the rage inside me burned hotter than the bonfire's embers. The crowd's laughter drifted over the 100-hectare farm, oblivious to the wound I carried. My father, Raymond Leclerc, had branded me a disgrace. My mother, Marie, had dismissed me with a glance. My brother, Etienne, had soaked up their praise while my life rotted in a mildewed box. I gripped the pin tighter, its point drawing a bead of blood, and forced myself back to the picnic tables. The red and white checkered cloths fluttered in the breeze, mocking the festive facade of this family that had buried me alive. I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible again, my boots sinking into the soft Alberta soil. Etienne's voice boomed near the bonfire, recounting a naval exercise off Vancouver Island, his navy blue uniform gleaming under the string lights. Neighbors nodded, their Molson bottles raised in toast. Marie hovered nearby, refilling his plate with maple-glazed ribs, her eyes never straying to me. Raymond stood tall, his retired major's posture unyielding, basking in Etienne's glow. I wanted to scream, to hurl the flag pin at them, to demand why my sacrifices, years in combat zones, lives saved, missions led, meant nothing. But my voice stayed locked in my throat, choked by years of their indifference. I was a U.S. Army Major General, 33 years old, yet to them, I was less than the dust on my boots. Then it happened. The outdoor TV, propped on a makeshift stand, flickered from hockey highlights to a CBC News alert. The crowd's chatter died. A stern anchor's voice cut through the night, breaking news from Washington. The Pentagon confirms the youngest U.S. general, a Canadian-born strategist, has led a global AI counteroffensive, saving millions from rogue systems. My face filled the screen, my name, my rank, my uniform. The words hit like a shockwave. Major General, 33 years old, mastermind of Operation Sentinel. The field went silent, the kind of quiet that swallows sound itself. My heart stopped, not with pride, but with a hollow ache. Raymond's Molson bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the gravel. Marie's tray of Nanaimo bars trembled, her eyes wide with shock. Etienne's smug grin froze, his jaw twitching. Every head turned, neighbors, cousins, strangers, staring at me, not with love, but with disbelief, as if I were an alien in their midst. I didn't move. I didn't smile. The pain from the shed, the weight of that box, the sting of Raymond's words, all surged back, sharper now. They saw me, but not as a daughter, not as a sister, just as a spectacle, a glitch in their perfect narrative. Evelyn? Marie whispered, her voice cracking, stepping toward me. I raised a hand, stopping her cold. Don't, I said, my voice low, raw with fury. You don't get to say my name now. Her face crumpled, but I felt nothing, no warmth, no forgiveness. Raymond turned away, his shoulders slumping, unable to meet my gaze. Etienne muttered something to a neighbor, his charm faltering. The crowd's eyes burned into me, but I stood taller, the flag pin still clenched in my fist. This wasn't vindication. It was a wound reopened, a reminder that their love was conditional, tied to a legacy I'd never fit. The CBC anchor droned on, detailing my role in thwarting a global crisis, but the words felt distant. I wasn't their hero. I was their shame, exposed under the Alberta stars. And in that moment, I knew, this was no victory. It was the spark of a war I hadn't chosen but would fight. The Lethbridge night swallowed me whole as I walked away from the Canada Day crowd, the CBC anchor's words, Major General, 33 years old, mastermind of Operation Sentinel, still ringing in my ears. The shattered glass of my father's Molson bottle, Marie's trembling tray, Etienne's faltering grin, they were seared into me, but not as victory. They were fuel. My family's rejection, cemented by that soggy box of discarded memories in the shed, had carved a truth I couldn't ignore. They didn't just dismiss me, they erased me. But the fire in my gut wasn't just pain, it was resolve. I wasn't a disgrace. I was a soldier. And soldiers don't break, they fight. Back in my childhood bedroom, 10 kilometers from the farm's heart, I sat on the edge of a creaking mattress, the Canadian flag pin from my grandfather still clenched in my fist. Its sharp edges grounded me. I wouldn't let Raymond, Marie, or Etienne define me anymore. But then, 2 days later, the war escalated. I was in Ottawa, 3,000 kilometers from Alberta's wheat fields, at a Pentagon briefing room, when my phone buzzed with a CTV news notification. My cousin Julian Gagnon's face filled the screen, his Royal Military College uniform crisp, his voice steady as he claimed credit for Operation Sentinel. It was a tough call, he said, eyes glinting with rehearsed sincerity, but I led the AI counteroffensive from the ground up. My blood turned to ice. Julian, who'd never set foot in a war room, was stealing my work, my sleepless nights, my strategies, my sacrifices. I recognized the cadence of his speech, the polished phrases. They were Etienne's, my brother, the public affairs officer who spun stories like a spider spins webs. And behind them, I saw Raymond's shadow, his approval, his connections, his belief that Julian was a better heir to the Leclerc legacy. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a calculated theft, a knife twisted deeper than any shed could hold. I called Colonel Amara Singh, my mentor at the Pentagon, from a secure line in my Ottawa hotel room. The air was heavy, 22 degrees Celsius, the city's Rideau Canal shimmering outside my window. Amara, I said, my voice tight, Julian's on CTV, claiming my operation. Her response was sharp, like a blade. He's not alone, Evelyn. Check your email. I opened my laptop, heart pounding. An encrypted file from Mark Tremblay, a cybersecurity specialist I'd trusted since Kandahar, waited. Inside were logs, emails between Etienne and a CTV producer, timestamps matching Julian's interview. One line burned, ensure the narrative credits Gagnon. Bouchard's role is irrelevant. Another email, from Raymond to a Pentagon contact, read, "My daughter's contributions are overstated. Julian is the real leader." My father had sold me out, not just to the family, but to the world. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The pain was too raw, too vast, like standing on the edge of Banff's cliffs with no ground beneath me. Instead, I dialed Claire Dubois, an Ottawa-based investigative journalist who'd exposed corruption in the Canadian forces. "Claire," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside, "I need you to dig. Julian, Etienne, Raymond, they're rewriting my life." She didn't hesitate. "Send me what you've got, Evelyn. We'll burn their lies to the ground." Mark's next message came at midnight, a decrypted Pentagon server log showing Julian accessing my operation files, guided by Etienne's clearance. Raymond's name appeared again, linked to a classified memo questioning my stability. My family wasn't just betraying me, they were dismantling my career, brick by brick. I stood at the hotel window, the Ottawa skyline glowing under a moonless night. The Rideau Canal reflected nothing but my rage. I'd spent years sending money home, $50,000 over a decade, to keep the farm afloat, skipping meals to afford it. I'd led missions in deserts where every second could be my last, all to prove I was enough. But to them, I was a threat to Etienne's shine, to Julian's ambition, to Raymond's pride. "You don't get to erase me," I whispered to the glass, my breath fogging the pain. Amara's words echoed, "You're a general, Evelyn. Act like one." I opened my laptop again, compiling every email, every log, every shred of evidence. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every soldier whose work was stolen, every woman whose voice was silenced. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Ottawa skyline loomed outside my hotel window, its lights flickering like distant stars, but no star could cut through the storm raging inside me. It was 6 a.m., 3 days after Julian Gagnon's smug face on CTV News claimed my Operation Sentinel, with my brother Etienne's polished words and my father Raymond's betrayal paving his way. The evidence I'd gathered with Mark Tremblay and Claire Dubois, emails, server logs, Raymond's damning memo, sat on my laptop, a ticking bomb. I'd sent $50,000 home to Lethbridge over the years, lived on instant coffee and $2 ramen to keep the farm's lights on, only to learn my family had used it to prop up Etienne's career while erasing mine. But the war I thought I was fighting took a darker turn. At 7 a.m., my phone pinged with an email from the U.S. Department of Defense. Subject: immediate suspension. My heart stopped. The words burned: Major General Evelyn Bouchard, suspended pending investigation for unauthorized disclosure of classified drone reconnaissance data. The accusation hit like a grenade, its shrapnel tearing through 15 years of flawless service. I hadn't leaked anything. I'd led Operation Sentinel, secured global networks, saved millions. But the signature, MJR Delta, told me everything. It was a ghost, a Pentagon alias, but I knew the man behind it, General Victor Tremblay, a Canadian-born U.S. officer who'd never forgiven me for exposing a flaw in his drone command model 2 years ago in Kabul. It cost him a promotion and a $10 million contract. Now, he was Julian's ally, orchestrating this takedown to bury me for good. My hotel room, chilled to 18 degrees Celsius, felt like a cell. I paced the floor, the Rideau Canal's calm waters mocking my fury. This wasn't just my family's betrayal anymore, it was a calculated strike from the top, a conspiracy to silence a woman who'd outshone their egos. I called Mark Tremblay, my voice ablaze. "Mark, it's me. They suspended me. MJR Delta. Find the source." His reply was steady, like the click of a rifle. "On it, Evelyn. They messed with the wrong general." By noon, Mark sent a file, Pentagon server logs showing Victor accessing my classified files, using a cloned biometric ID to frame me. The logs traced to his office, 500 meters from my Ottawa hotel, no proxy, no cover. Sloppy. Arrogant. Typical. Claire Dubois called next, her voice urgent. "Evelyn, I've got something. Victor met Julian at a Tim Hortons on Spark Street last week. My source recorded it. She played the audio, Victor's gruff tone, Julian's eager agreement. You take the credit, Gagnon, Victor said. Bouchard's a liability. We'll handle her. My blood boiled. They weren't just stealing my work, they were dismantling my life. I met Claire at a diner off Highway 417, its vinyl booths sticky with grease, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee. Outside, Ottawa's summer heat hit 25 degrees Celsius. Claire slid a USB drive across the table, her eyes fierce. This is it, Evelyn. Emails between Victor and Etienne, planning the CTV story. Your father's name's in there too, approving it all. I plugged the drive into my laptop. One email from Etienne to Victor read, Julian's the face. Evelyn's expendable. Another, from Raymond, to Victor, my daughter's too volatile for leadership. Ensure Gagnon rises. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a rage so pure it felt like fire. My family, my own blood, had handed Victor the ammunition to destroy me. I looked at Claire. We're not just exposing them, I said, my voice low, deadly. We're burning their lies to ash. Back in my hotel, I stood at the window, the Rideau Canal now a dark ribbon under the night sky. I'd fought in deserts, stared down death, but this was a battlefield of betrayal, where trust was a casualty. Amara Singh's voice echoed from our last call, You're a general, Evelyn. Act like one. I opened my laptop, merging Mark's logs, Claire's audio, and my own mission reports into a dossier. Every keystroke was a bullet, every file a blade. This wasn't about saving my career anymore. It was about truth, mine, and every soldier's whose work was stolen, every voice silenced by power. The war had shifted, and I was no longer just a target. I was a weapon, forged in pain, ready to strike. The Ottawa morning was grey, the air heavy at 20 degrees Celsius. As I stepped into the Parliament Hill hearing room, my U.S. Army dress blues pressed sharp, the weight of 15 years of service pinned to my chest. The dossier, Mark Tremblay's server logs, Claire Dubois's audio, my mission reports, burned in my briefcase like a loaded rifle. 3 days ago, the Department of Defense's suspension email had branded me a traitor, a lie orchestrated by General Victor Tremblay to protect Julian Gagnon's stolen glory. My family, Raymond, Etienne, and even Marie's silence, had armed the conspiracy, their betrayal deeper than the Rideau Canal outside. But today, in this oak-paneled room, before Canada's House of Commons Defence Committee and CTV cameras streaming live, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was Major General Evelyn Bouchard, and I was here to bury their lies. The room buzzed with tension, MPs in suits whispering, reporters scribbling. Victor sat in the front row, his medals gleaming, his jaw tight. Julian, in his Royal Military College uniform, fidgeted beside him, his confidence cracking. Etienne, polished in his navy blue Canadian Forces jacket, stared straight ahead, his public affairs charm useless now. Raymond, my father, sat rigid, his retired major's posture betraying no remorse. I took the stand, my boots echoing on the hardwood floor, 10 meters from the men who'd tried to erase me. The committee chair, an MP from Calgary, adjusted her glasses. Major General Bouchard, you've requested this hearing to address serious allegations. The floor is yours. I nodded, my voice steady as steel. For 15 years, I served in silence, leading missions, saving lives, building Operation Sentinel. But silence is what they wanted, because the truth was too inconvenient. I clicked the projector. The screen lit up with Julian's CTV interview, his voice claiming my AI counteroffensive. Gasps rippled through the room. Then I played the mission audio, my voice, barking orders in Kandahar, coordinating strikes that saved millions. Julian Gagnon was never there, I said, my eyes locking on his. He stole my work, propped up by lies. Julian's hands shook, his face pale. I clicked again, showing Mark's server logs. General Victor Tremblay cloned my biometric ID to frame me for a leak, protecting his protégé. Victor's jaw clenched, his metals glinting like a shield he couldn't hide behind. The room grew still, the air thick as an Alberta fog. I turned to Etienne, projecting his email to the CTV producer. Bouchard's role is irrelevant. My brother, I said, my voice cutting like a blade, sold my legacy for a headline. The final blow landed with Raymond's email to Victor, displayed in stark black and white. My daughter's too volatile for leadership. I faced him, my heart a furnace of rage and grief. You didn't just betray me, Dad. You armed my enemies. Raymond looked away, his shoulders slumping, the first crack in his armor. The MPs leaned forward, reporters scribbling furiously. I paused, letting the silence suffocate them. This wasn't oversight, I said, my voice rising. It was assassination, strategic, calculated, personal. They didn't investigate me. They buried me to protect their egos. The room was a tomb, every breath held. I pointed at Victor. You thought a fake suspension would silence me. You dug your own grave. To Etienne, you spun lies because you couldn't face me. To Julian, you wore my victories like a costume. To Raymond, you taught me leadership is sacrifice, but you sacrificed your daughter for a seat at their table. A murmur broke the silence, MPs shifting, cameras zooming. The chair cleared her throat. These are grave accusations, General Bouchard. I nodded, my voice unwavering. They're not accusations. They're evidence. Claire's audio played, Victor's voice at Tim Hortons, Bouchard's a liability. The room erupted in whispers. Julian sank in his seat, Victor's face drained of color, Etienne's hands gripped his chair. Raymond stood, his face a mask, and walked out, the door's slam echoing like a gunshot. I stepped back from the mic, my chest tight but my spine straight. This wasn't victory, it was justice, raw and unyielding. The truth had landed, not like a gavel, but like a storm over the prairies, tearing down everything in its path. I was no longer their disgrace. I was their reckoning. The echo of the hearing room door slamming behind Raymond Leclerc lingered in my mind as I stepped out of Parliament Hill, the Ottawa air crisp at 18 degrees Celsius, the Rideau Canal shimmering under a late morning sun. The truth I'd unleashed, Mark Tremblay's server logs, Claire Dubois's audio, my mission reports, had torn through the lies of Julian Gagnon, Etienne Leclerc, and General Victor Tremblay like a prairie wildfire. But justice wasn't a warm embrace, it was a cold, hollow relief. My chest still carried the weight of a family that had branded me a disgrace, a soggy box of discarded memories, and a career nearly shattered by a fabricated suspension. I'd won, but the cost was carved into me, deeper than any Kandahar scar. As I walked past the Peace Tower, its clock ticking toward noon, I knew this wasn't the end, it was a reckoning, a pivot toward something new. By evening, the fallout hit like a Chinook wind. CTV News broke the story. General Victor Tremblay retires in disgrace, stripped of honors. Julian Gagnon, my cousin who'd worn my victories like a stolen uniform, was expelled from the Royal Military College, his name erased from their rolls. Etienne, my brother who'd spun my work into headlines for Julian, was reassigned to a remote naval outpost in Nunavut, 3,000 kilometers from his Ottawa spotlight. Raymond, my father, vanished into silence. No call, no letter, no apology. The man who'd called me a stain on the Leclerc name left Ottawa without a word, his pride shattered like the Molson bottle he dropped at the Canada Day bash. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work, and I was done begging for a seat at a table that never had a place for me. I left Ottawa the next day, driving 3,500 kilometers west to Banff, Alberta, where the Rockies rose like sentinels against a cloudless sky. I bought a 20-hectare plot of land, its pine forests and open meadows a far cry from the suffocating weight of Lethbridge's wheat fields. There, under the shadow of Cascade Mountain, I founded the Bouchard Institute for Ethical Leadership, not for glory, but for truth. It was a sanctuary for soldiers, veterans, and young leaders, a place to learn that honor isn't inherited, it's built through courage and sacrifice. The Institute's first lecture hall, framed by cedar beams, smelled of fresh timber and hope. I stood at its entrance, the air cool at 15 degrees Celsius, and felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. A week later, as I cleared a trail behind the lecture hall, gravel crunching under my boots, I saw a familiar figure approach. Marie Leclerc, my mother, stepped onto the path, her brown coat dusted with early snow. She held a small package, her hands trembling. "Evelyn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I kept this." She handed me my Calgary Marathon medal, its red and white ribbon polished, no longer faded. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes wet. "I wasn't strong enough." I took the medal, its weight heavy with years of her silence. "You chose Etienne," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You chose Raymond. You didn't choose me." Her face crumpled, but I didn't soften. I wasn't forgiving her, not yet. I was forgiving myself for carrying their rejection too long. Marie nodded, turned, and walked away, her footsteps fading into the pines. I stood alone, the medal cold in my palm, the Rockies looming like a promise. Amara Singh's words rang in my head, "You're a general, Evelyn. Act like one." I'd spent 15 years proving my worth, to Raymond, to Marie, to a system that tried to bury me. But Banff wasn't about proof, it was about purpose. The institute grew, its classes filled with cadets who carried their own scars, their own battles. One evening, a young soldier stayed after a lecture, her eyes sharp like mine once were. "How do you keep going?" she asked, voice low. "When the people who should love you don't?" I paused, the medal still in my pocket. "You build your own table," I said. "And you choose who sits at it." She nodded, and I saw it, a spark of the fire I'd found in that Ottawa hearing room. This was my legacy, not a name, but a place where truth could breathe. The Banff evening settled over my 20-hectare plot, the Rockies standing silent under a sky dusted with stars, the air crisp at 10 degrees Celsius. I stood outside the Bouchard Institute for Ethical Leadership, its cedar walls glowing faintly under solar lanterns, a beacon carved from the ashes of my past. The weight of Ottawa's hearing room, where I'd faced down Victor Tremblay, Julian Gagnon, Etienne Leclerc, and my father Raymond, still lingered, but it no longer crushed me. Their lies had crumbled, Victor retired in disgrace, Julian expelled from the Royal Military College, Etienne banished to a Nunavut outpost, 3,000 kilometers from his polished Ottawa life. My mother Marie's quiet apology, her trembling hands offering my polished Calgary Marathon medal, hadn't healed the wound, but it had freed me. I'd carried their rejection, Raymond's cold dismissal, Marie's silence, Etienne's betrayal, for too long. Now, under Alberta's endless sky, I wasn't running from it. I was rebuilding. I walked the Institute's grounds, my boots crunching on gravel paths lined with young pines, each step a reminder of what I'd built. The Institute wasn't just a building, it was a promise, to soldiers, veterans, and dreamers who'd been told their worth didn't matter. In lecture halls smelling of cedar and hope, I saw young faces, some scarred like mine, learning that leadership isn't about medals or applause. It's about standing tall when the world tries to bury you. One evening, as the sun dipped behind Cascade Mountain, a cadet named Sarah lingered after class, her eyes heavy with questions. "How do you keep fighting?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind, "when the people you love most turn against you?" I paused, my hand brushing the marathon medal in my pocket. "You don't fight for them," I said softly. "You fight for the truth inside you. That's your North Star." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through, and I knew she'd carry that forward, just as I had. This journey wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. Raymond taught me leadership is sacrifice, but he sacrificed me for a legacy that never included me. Marie taught me love is patient, but her patience was only for Etienne. Julian and Victor taught me ambition can blind, but it was their blindness that sharpened my sight. Every wound, from the soggy box in Lethbridge's shed to the fabricated suspension in Ottawa, forged me into someone new. I didn't need their approval anymore. I needed purpose. The Bouchard Institute became that purpose, a place where truth isn't just spoken but lived. We teach ethics in combat, resilience in pain, the courage to stand alone. Every cadet who walks through those doors carries a story, and I've learned mine isn't unique. Maybe you felt it too, the sting of being unseen, the ache of being dismissed by those who should have lifted you up. As I stood under the Rockies, the stars brighter than any Ottawa skyline, I realized something: pain doesn't define us. What we build from it does. You don't need a uniform or a title to claim your worth. You don't need a family's blessing to carve your path. Every choice you make, every truth you hold, is a brick in your legacy. Don't wait for permission to shine. Build your table, choose who sits at it, and let the world see what you're made of. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt erased but refused to stay buried, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below, tell me what truth you're fighting for. Hit that like button if this moved you, and subscribe to True North Courage for more stories of grit and heart. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. I'm Evelyn Bouchard, and this is my truth. What's yours?